Welcome to Whisky.com, where fine spirits meet. My name is Horst Lüning. This is my son Ben, and today we have a beginner's tasting with those 4 bottles. We told about those bottles in our last newsletter on Whisky.com, so if you would like to stay tuned in, please subscribe to our newsletter on Whisky.com. I wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year upcoming in the next days.
Yeah, Merry Christmas from me too, and the stream seems to be live and well.
Yeah, and we're not so many online as I saw.
Yeah, we just started. Just continue.
So we're just starting with a little chat around until everybody has LinkedIn. And please be sure that you have still water with you, because we have one whiskey here on our cask which has to be diluted down to tasting strength. So this one has 60% ABV, 120 US proof. So be careful. This one will paralyze your tongue if you have it neat.
Yeah, I think you wrote a newsletter, right? So hopefully some of you do have the whiskies. In the German stream, we sold a lot of these big, medium and small tasting packs. Unfortunately, there's a lot of bureaucracy that we can't sell to the outside of Germany. But hopefully you found these whiskies for you.
Yeah, I started looking after those bottles and would like to have a mix for the entry. So we have the Edradour, we have the Glenfarclas 105, the Highland Park 12 years, and the Talisker with 10 years. And if you have a look at them, those are all Scotch premium single malt whiskies. Mm-hmm. And this has to do with the success, the worldwide success of Scotch whisky, which went over several hundred years. The first mentioning of distilled grains or barley was from 1494. It's the first mentioning of Scotch whisky. And then the British Empire spread over the world, and the Scots took the whiskey with them all over the world. And it's said that the English were governing the empire and the Scotch were running the empire. So the Scotch were all over the world, and they were, in the colonies, as they were the US later, and in India and in Australia and New Zealand and everywhere where the empire was present, there was Scotch as well. And so we start this tasting, or we dedicate this tasting, we dedicate this tasting completely to Scotch. Just take over, please.
Yeah. Scotch is the big thing, as Horst said. It started with Scotch and spread all over the world. And the New World, the Americans, so North America in particular, was the main export country for the whiskey, and they started the bourbon. They had whiskey before that. Usually, back in the days, the Americans would do more rye whiskey because they could grow it better. It was just a crops that they grew at the beginning, and later they turned to corn. And after they won the War of Independence, they had considerable help from the French, and in honor of that, they named a county the Bourbon County, a Bourbon County, from the house of the Bourbon in France, which was the ruling king back in the day. The British were a democracy with a monarch as well, and this is where they had the best water. They had limestone in the ground, which filtered the water, low on iron, and this just was the place where you could make whiskey. And this is where the bourbon started, from the Bourbon County. And if you go a bit south, the Bourbon County is at the very, very south of the Commonwealth of Kentucky. This is the flag of the Commonwealth of Kentucky. You end up in Tennessee. And Tennessee has a bit of a similar region. In the north of Tennessee, it's a bit rocky and with limestone. And that also filters the water good. So the Tennessee whiskey was founded there. And you know, a big brand of Tennessee whiskey, it's Jack Daniel's. So the beginners sometimes say, yeah, good Jack Daniel's is a good bourbon whiskey. It's not a bourbon whiskey. It could call itself a bourbon whiskey now, but it's a Tennessee whiskey. To be a Tennessee whiskey, you have to be a bit more than just a bourbon. Yeah. And then the third one, which is pretty famous for premium whiskey, we're really going after premium whiskey. If you look at the map for normal whiskey or low price whiskey, you do have a very, very different map. The next one with premium whiskey would be Ireland. With the Irish whiskey, you have the Jameson, you have the Bushmills, you have the Kool-Aid, the Middleton. They were a bit bigger back in the days. They took a bit of a dump with a recession. And
the Prohibition.
And the Prohibition.
And the leave of the Empire.
Yeah.
Of the Commonwealth of Nations.
Mm-hmm. So, but it's still known for whiskey, and it's getting a bit of a revival. You know, the more craft breweries, we have the Teeling, and they are more and more popping up, and they're trying to get hold of what is Irish whiskey and make Irish whiskey
great again.
Didn't want to say that, but make Irish whiskey an icon of whiskey again. Yeah. Then you have the Canadian whiskey, which is like the little brother to the bourbon. Yeah. And they were also a bit bigger back in the days. During the Prohibition, they just had a huge boost because they could sell in the black market to the Americans, just sell it over here, and then they transport it over the border, and that what made all the southern Canadian whiskies really big. And as you mentioned, did you mention that before?
No, not yet.
The Indian whiskey. The Indian whiskey is a bit of a
it's not a real whiskey as we think about. It's a mixture. They produce their alcohol mostly from molasses, which is the leftover from the sugar cane if you produce sugar. And then they mix it with whiskey, with grain whiskey, to have some taste of whiskey in it, and that together they call
that they call it whiskey, but
they call it whiskey. But to be fair,
it's a mixture between rum and whiskey.
If the Scots say bourbon is no whiskey,
I do say bourbon is whiskey, but it's not a Scotch.
It's not a Scotch, so you can say, well, the Indians have their own whiskey, their particular own whiskey, but we don't see it as a whiskey.
Yeah, but they do recognize the premium whiskey, and there are two particular distilleries. You have the Paul John and the Amrut distillery, and they produce a single malt whiskey. So they produce like a Scotch, bit different. They have totally different climate down there, so the whiskey becomes very different to the Scotch one, but they do make a premium whiskey. So most of the Indian whiskey is just bad, but there are two distinct ones.
We had one
which was better. Yeah.
Out of a Tetra Pak.
Yeah, that was awful.
Have a search for that whiskey, for that video Tetra Pak whiskey India.
Yeah, definitely. This year I did a trip to Japan, and Mr. Taketsuru, which is very famous for the whiskey in Japan. If you know whiskey in Japan, it's this guy, Taketsuru. And he went back in the 30s or something like that. 20s, to Scotland. He stayed there pretty long and learned the whiskey trade and brought that back to Japan. And actually the Japanese whiskey industry is on the rise, and they produce pretty good stuff. So Japanese whiskey should not be ignored if you talk about whiskey. Also, Germany has about, what did you say? 100 whiskey distilleries, but there was a EU subsidiary, what's it called? Subsidy? Yeah, where you get money for basically doing nothing, for planting crops, and they cut the subsidies, so they had what we're doing now, and they turned a bit into, some of them turned to whiskey making.
From fruit.
From fruit or from their grain. They said, okay, we can't sell the grain as good anymore, so we make whiskey. Whiskey has a good price, so we make whiskey. So there are a few that can make quite a good whiskey, but there are also a few bad ones on the market. And we do have a bit of the McMurra one in Sweden, and there are a few in Switzerland, there are a few in Austria. So
and France.
Whiskey is spreading, like the craft beer scene, where you have every restaurant is now a craft brewery. You do have a few breweries a few distilleries that pop up just everywhere on the land, everywhere on the map.
Shall we switch over to the definition of whiskey? Whiskey is, in terms of Scotch whiskey, there's a regulation from 1988 which defined what whiskey is, the Scotch Whisky Act, and then it was revised by regulations in 2009 where they added a few things and left a few things away, and Scotch whiskey has to be produced in Scotland. And from water and malted barley, and to which only whole grains of other cereals may be added, all of which have been processed in that distillery into a mash. And then you have to ferment it, so you have the yeast, and they produce from this mash a beer, and this beer hasn't added hops, so it's not bitter. It's a normal fruity beer, but the ABV, the alcohol content, is quite high, going up to 9.5%. And then you distill it to a not higher degree than 94.8%. Well, technically, you can't reach more than 94.8%. Because it's called an azeotrope, so you need molecular grids to get higher. No, so and then you have to mature this whiskey in oak casks like this one, but not bigger than 700 liters, because then the inner surface of the cask is too small for the liters in the cask, so that there is only very few transfer of taste active substances from the oak into the whiskey. So you have to stay below 700 liters, and a typical whiskey cask has around 210 to 250 liters. This is quite normal for whiskey, and only those casks from Spain and from Portugal, they have 600 or 500. Some have 600, and the very least have 700 liters or 699. Then you have to mature the whiskey in Scotland for at least 3 years, and this you have to do in a bonded warehouse with the excise officer looking over it, and or the crown may give you a permit for some other place. Then you have to fill it into bottles, and not less than 40% ABV. This is the legal minimum for whiskey, and you may add a little caramel, to the whiskey to get a darker color. But from those 4 whiskeys we have here, only the Talisker is one where they add a very little caramel to have a constant color over the different batches. The others are uncolored whiskey.
Okay, so yeah, that was the Scotch definition of whiskey. The American definition of whiskey used to be the Bourbon Act. Now it's Title 27 of the federal regulations. And the Title 27 is called Alcohol, Tobacco Products and Firearms, so ATF. And it's subsection 522. And what the Americans define as whiskey, as bourbon whiskey, is you have to have at least 51% corn. So that gives the whiskey, the bourbon whiskey, that distinct sweet flavor. The
So
corn
for
is
not the-
very sweet.
Not for the American, but the others from all around the world. Corn in this times means maize.
Maize, yeah, the yellow stuff, no? Where you can make popcorn out of it. They are even a bit stricter. You're not allowed exceeding 160 proof. That's 80% ABV. So you're not allowed to distill as high. But usually, even in Scotland, nobody still distills that high. And you're not allowed to fill it with more than 125 proof, which is 62.5. And you have to use new charred oak containers, which was back in the days when they wrote the act. That was from the lobby of the lumberjacks. They wanted to sell more lumber,
Which is as well better for the taste because fresh casks have a higher transfer of aromas into the whiskey.
And nowadays you're allowed to make bourbon all over America. Back in the days when they started, you're allowed to make bourbon only in Bourbon County. Then it was Kentucky, because Bourbon County belonged to Kentucky. Now it's you only can make Kentucky straight bourbon in Kentucky, because Kentucky. But then we have another state which has its own regulations for whiskey. It's the state of Tennessee, public chapter number 341, blah blah, House Bill, something with politics. Manufactured in Tennessee, so Tennessee whiskey has to be made in Tennessee. Also 51% corn. Then we have not more than 80% alcohol distillation, normal, aged in new charred oak barrels, but it doesn't say how old. Filtered through maple charcoal, and that is the specialty about Tennessee whiskeys. They are made with the Lincoln County process, where they take sugar maple, and they char it, so they make charcoal out of it, and then they filter their whiskey through it. And this filtering, this active charcoal, takes out the bad taste, they say, and filters it out, and you get a very smooth whiskey. So you have a sweet and smooth whiskey. And then you're not allowed to bottle it less than 40% alcohol. Okay, so that's...
I think they do not have to write the age of the maturation period because the Bourbon Act lies below. You have to...
I think there are some subsections that maybe cover that. But I think back in the days they said you have to mature it for 3 years. You can mature it for 2 years, but then you have to write it on the bottle.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, so what sequence are we going to try today?
Yeah, we have the Edradour 10 years of age first, because it's a typical Highland whiskey, matured to a good part in ex-sherry casks. So this is 40% ABV. It's quite smooth. It's not too complicated for beginners. So we start with this one. Then we go over to the Glenfarclas 105, and the 105 means 105 proof, but not the US proof, but the imperial proof from the old British system. And that means 100 proof had been 57% ABV, and each 3 proof on top of that means each 5 proof on top of it means 3% ABV. So this one has 60% alcohol in it, and you have to dilute this, otherwise you will burn your mouth, and this is paralyzing your tasting buds. So you have to reduce down. So we describe how you dilute whiskey with this bottle, and the main taste, because it's from the Speyside, which is part of the Highlands, the taste is quite parallel to this one, is not too far away. So these two stay with the main taste together. And then we come to the very north of Scotland, to the Orkney Islands. And this whiskey contains a little bit of smokiness. And this means if you would have this one first, then both of them wouldn't go over the smoky taste which will reside in your mouth. So here we have the Highland Park. And then at the final, we have the Talisker, and this one has a much higher smoke content. So it's very peaty, or the smoke comes from the peat. And it has some sharp tastes, either chili or pepper. So the sequence goes from not peated to heavily peated. And typically you would put the high ABV to the very end, but we put it in between and dilute it down to a suitable amount.
Okay, then let's just dive right in.
Yeah.
Let's start with the Edradour. I think the Scottish say Edradour.
Did Andrew say that?
I think they say Edradour. Not quite sure.
It's a
Maybe he was a little drunk.
Scottish rural.
Edradour. It's So for everyone who has it in their glass, please write what you taste in the chat. I do with a bit of a vanilla fruitiness.
It's very complex, very full, and very pleasant. So if you're a beginner, and this is a beginner's tasting, then you definitely feel the alcohol in the nose because it's 40% ABV. Definitely more than wine or beer. And this 40% you smell in your nose, but as soon as you have this glass 10, 20, 30 seconds at your nose, then the brain will find out the taste behind the alcohol and will no longer taste the alcohol. So and after a while, as you said, vanilla and caramel at first. This is from the casks.
Mm-hmm.
And then there is fruitiness, full, strong fruitiness.
Yeah, I do have fruitiness, sweetness, but it's delicate and yeah, delicate and soft. I would say
It's soft, definitely.
I taste like nuts. Okay.
Yeah, so to come to the principal tastes of this whiskey, the casks are from oak, and oak is, well, there's celluloses as the main substance in oak, and there is lignin in this oak. This is the hardening substance. Oak is a hardwood compared to softwood. In softwood there's lignin as well in that, but less. And in the hardwood, there's a lot of lignin in it, some tens of %. And this lignin, if you heat it up, then it will cut into vanillin. And this, what we are smelling here, and the casks are produced in that way that they are toasted in the beginning to 150, 200 degrees centigrade. The water in the wood is cooking, it's hot, and the chains of celluloses are cut up into maltoses, sugars, and these sugars are caramelized, and from that the brown color comes from, and the toffee taste, the caramel taste as well.
Mm-hmm.
So
Okay.
this is that, and then there was the sentence about the nuttiness. And the nuttiness comes from sherry casks. Old sherry casks tend to give out some nuttiness.
Sweater Warner, apple, and Jason from Texas. I smell banana. Yeah, so
The
we do
fruitiness is produced by the yeast strains, which ferment the mash into the beer, and these yeasts produce a lot of esters, lactones, and aldehydes, whatever, a lot of substances, and most of them tend to have a fruity note, like apples, bananas, pears. This is typically what you find. Those pineapple is quite rare. Yeah, I was
Okay. Cheers.
So what is important? Don't swallow everything at once. Most is sniffing on it. There is a 1,000 different aromas in that whiskey. And, well, your nerves are going through the bottom of your skull just into your brain where the olfactory center resides, and this is learning the taste. The taste are the aromas, the smell. The taste from the tongue, there are only a few dozen different receptors in our tongue, maximum 100, and they bring sweet, sour, salty, bitterness, and umami, which is the smell or the taste of proteins. And all those are far less differentiated by the sensors than the aromas which go directly into your brain. So smell is 1,000 more than the taste. So it's very important to smell first.
You do get a lot of sweetness in there, and a bit of fruitiness, but in the taste, it's a bit stronger, a bit with oak, a bit with a hint of spiciness as well, I would say, and a bit of a chocolatey bitterness, I would say.
Yeah, so in the aftertaste, the oakiness comes through, and this oakiness delivers some bitterness. It's typically from the tannins, from the oak. And first it's a little spicy, herbs in it. This is from the wood. And after you swallow it, there are quite often some bitter aromas tastes are staying on your tongue. And this is typically it's called the aftertaste. And this is from the oak.
We have
smiling?
We have a bit of a troll in here, or more than one. Ben, is anything on your shirt? Please take a look at the color. That one in the German tasting as well, but I changed the shirt, huh? This one is straight from the washing machine. It's Whisky.com, and the other one was Whisky.de, so there's nothing on the color. They're trying to troll me. Okay, but toasted almonds in the taste for sure. Yeah, toasted almonds.
Nuts and almonds, they are together in one category.
Smells like a fruit salad. Tastes like a peanut. Nutmeg, maybe. Yeah, so it's a bit of a nutmeg is a bit more spiciness. Someone says, yes, walnut, Andy Umscheid. And yeah, so it's a mixture. It's a very balanced light whiskey with a bit of a spiciness in there. Nuttiness.
So you can wonderfully recognize that this one has on one side the yeasts with their aroma they produce during fermenting. On the other hand, you have the oakiness or the oak cask, which produce on one side the vanilla and the caramel, as well as the tannins and the light espresso notes. So it's a wonderful complex whiskey which shows both influences very well. Okay.
Nice. So, hope you like the Edradour, and we're gonna continue a bit with an introduction of how whiskey is made. And the Scotch whiskey all starts with barley. Barley is the single malt, and what you got with the barley grain is a lot of starch. But you can't ferment starch very well, so you have to turn it into sugar. And what you do is you let the malt do it for you. The plant wants to grow and converts the starches into sugars when it wants to start to grow. So what you do is you steep it. So you put a lot of water in it, put it in a tub, let it soak a bit. The little plant, the seed, realizes, oh, there's water, I can try to grow. And then it turns the starch into sugar and tries to grow. And therefore you have to spread it out, but you don't want any molds, so you have to turn it a lot. And that's what I'm here showing you at the Lafroig distillery. They are one of the old ones which still do it the old way. They have a malting floor, and then they turn, and they have a rake to turn, and they all have the old shovel. And that's how they do it. And so you let it, you have to turn it every few hours, and you have to have open windows to let in fresh air. And then you get the malt. And the malt now has to be turned into a liquid that can be fermented, because we want a whiskey, which is a liquid. So they take very hot water and they take the grinded down malt and they wash out the sugars and a bit of the leftover starches from this grist, and they wash it about 2, some of them 3 times, and some of them use the third washing in the first washing of the next batch. And that's how you get the water and the sugar out into a very, very sugary water. It's just a very malty, sugary water that you have, which is called the mash, which then goes into the wash bag. And you add a lot of yeast. And the yeast takes the sugar and converts it into alcohol. And during this process, it releases CO2. And that's what you see right here. You see that you have a lot of bubbles, which is the CO2. This is the first kind of art that really contributes to the taste. You can change the yeast you take. You can have a very sweet yeast. You can have a spicy yeast. The Americans are very proud of their yeast. Every distillery has a very old yeast, and they have an old jug, and they have nowadays they have a laboratory, so that the old yeast from 18 something doesn't change, and it was the very, very old yeast they used for making the whiskey even hundreds of years ago. And usually most of the distilleries use dry yeast. And it's very interesting because even the temperature has an effect, and the duration has a great effect, and also the container has an effect. If you use stainless steel, it's different to a wooden container. Here you have a wooden container, and there lives bacteria in the wood, which is lactofermentation, which you have with pickles or kraut or Mm-hmm. So that gives you a taste as well, which is very interesting for the whiskey in the end. The next step, the hard piece of the production, which is the most spectacular one, are the stills. Here at Glenfarclas, we have stills that have a very special shape, and that is also something that gives you a great influence on the whiskey. You have a distinct shape. First of all, you have how wide it is. Then you have any constrictions here, or you have a reflux bowl, which is this bowl there. And very important is also how tall it is. If you have a very, very tall pot still, the alcohol separates very good, and you get a very smooth whiskey. If you have a wide pear-shaped still, you do get a very fast distillation, not a lot of separation going on. You get more of the oils and more of the heavier substances in your whiskey as well. That makes the whiskey a lot spicier. Also, the line arm is very important. If the line arm is falling, everything that's over the top and condensing in the line arm is flowing into the condenser, and therefore in the final product. If the line arm is rising, then everything that condenses in the line arm goes back into the pot and has to do the cycle again. And what is probably the most important thing is that it is copper. The copper is a catalyst for the reaction going on inside the still. And that makes the fusel alcohols, the faints and the bad substances that give you that vodka taste, that alcoholic taste, they neutralize that. And that's why you try to have a bit of a reflux going on, so it's tumbling in there and touching more of the copper before it's being distilled, and therefore you get a smoother spirit and not as alcoholic spirit as you might expect from other spirits that you might drink. So, and the last bit, very important, you mentioned it quite a bit now already, is the maturation. You take the whiskey, you fill it into an oak barrel. It's 99% oak barrels, and you mature it for at least 3 years, but most of the whiskeys have more years. We have 10 years, 12 years, 10 years again, but it goes up to 30, 40, 50 years. And then it's very important what kind of cask you use. Usually you have a very cheap cask. It's the used cask from the Americans. You have a bourbon cask, would give you that that sweet flavor from the American whiskey, from the bourbon. Or you have here the bigger ones. Here you can see good. The smaller ones are the bourbon barrels, and the bigger ones are the sherry barrels.
Hogsheads. Yeah.
Hogsheads or butts. And you do have a bit of a sherry in the cask. And usually, not today, not anymore that much, but they use European oak, which is a bit spicier, which has more tannins, a bit more bitter, more intense. And the Americans with the American white oak, which is a bit softer, which is a bit smoothing. So I just touched the barrels and the maturation just a bit. You can also toast your cask. You can char the cask. And you can even take wine casks or Madeira casks, portwood casks. And if you look at sherry and portwood, there you do have Pedro Ximénez, Oloroso, Manzanilla, Fino. There are tons of different spirits that you can have the cask from and mature your whiskey in it. And it will all have an influence on the whiskey. So there is really a great variance going on in the maturation, and some people say 70% of the taste in whiskey is maturation.
Yeah, so a few things are quite important in this particular manner. The casks in the US have to be fresh casks, cut in directly and only filled once. And in Scotland, the casks have to be from oak. And the rest of Europe, the casks may be from other species, not forced to be oak. So here we go. I think we're now ready for the next one. Otherwise, time is running fast. So now we're going to the Glenfarclas 105, which is really hefty. So you get a little bit. You're shaking your head.
The YouTube saying there's no stream, but there are tons of people who commenting on our stream, so I guess YouTube's lying. No, I'm still offline. I don't know why, but my stream says offline. Oh yeah, it's a sherry bomb.
And if you have the first nose, then you have a lot of alcohol.
Yeah.
In your nose.
The thing is, now we do have 170 people on the stream, but from the comments of the live chat, I would say most of them do know us, and they just jumped in.
Stream is fine.
Yeah, stream is
Perfect
fine.
for
Yeah.
me. Yeah.
What do I want to say? And I think we do have a bit more experienced consumers in here, as in the German chat.
Yeah. Do we have water?
Yeah. So this is the cask strength one. They say cask strength is 60%, but usually you do have cask strength are usually odd numbers. So I guess it's not a cask strength, but a high strength whiskey. But it's with 60%, it's very, very close to cask strength.
Yeah. You have to dilute it, say 50% of the content of your glass, you have to add water so that you come down from 60% ABV down to 40. Otherwise, there's a chance that you paralyze your tongue. So be careful with those cask strength whiskies. If you have them once too strong in your mouth, the evening is finished.
Okay. Yeah. So how do you enjoy your whiskey? There are a lot of people who say whiskey with ice, whiskey with cola, Coca-Cola or whatever cola, and with water. So what is the truth behind that?
Whiskey has a very, very complex taste, as we had it with the Edradour 10 years. And if you put it into cola, then everything is gone. Not everything, but most of it is gone. If you put ice in it, then the liquid will be cold, and the cooler a liquid is, the less vapors arise from the liquid, and you're able to smell less. So if you would like to have a good smell on a whiskey, then it has to be, well, room temperature. So some people go over a candle and warm it a little bit to get more of the aromas out of it. So this is too hot for me and too much. But have it in room temperature without ice, just a few drops, or if you do not have a pipette like this one, just take a tablespoon or a teaspoon, add water to it, so that you do not add too much of it.
So if you see a person who is adding ice or Coke into his whiskey, then usually he either has a very, very bad whiskey where he doesn't want the taste, or
supermarket
whiskey, or they just want to get drunk.
Yeah.
But watering your whiskey does open the whiskey. You have a mixture of alcohol and water in there. So the taste molecules, all the fattiness and the esters and everything that gives you the taste is diluted with the alcohol and the water. If you change this stable dilution, then you release some of these flavors. And so if you add just a few drops of water, your whiskey really changes. And the Scottish call that opening up. So you add a bit of water and it opens up the whiskey.
So adding here, the alcohol reduces a lot, and then some fresh fruit arise, and a little spiciness from the oak shines through. It smells a little sweet. Yeah, and I'm not quite sure. I think I'm at 45. Yeah, you added too few. I've seen that. And if you look very carefully, then the liquid turns hazy, a little bit hazy, and that means that some of those compounds are no longer able to stay in solution. They fell out of solution, and then they build complex structures called mycels, and those you can see. And some distilleries cool the whiskey down, then those mycels appear, then they filter it, then it's called cool filtering, chill filtering, and then the whiskey is clear. And then if you add ice, the typical drinker on parties, they add ice, then it won't turn hazy, because people think if a whiskey turns hazy, it's bad. But no, this means this is a very good whiskey, because there's everything in that whiskey which comes from the cask, which comes from the maturation, and now it's released hazy.
I like the 105. It got a lot of fruit in there, cherries, a wine character, and the more it progresses, the more it goes into a bittersweet chocolate, a bit of a tannin note, bit of an oaky note, bit of a nuttiness.
Yeah, I had too few water as well, so it's quite hefty and very, very fruity.
Here was the question was, what kind of water? That does matter quite a bit. Don't use water with gas, so any carbonated water, just rule that out.
And if you're living in an area where you have chloride in your tap water,
chloride.
Don't use tap water with chloride in it. So we're happy we do not have it here. So we can use tap water as in Scotland. On the other hand, use water like this. This is real water from Scotland. Use still water and very little minerals in it.
Yeah.
So they typically, those French waters like this Vitel, Evian, those are the right ones.
Kind of the dead waters that don't have quite anything in it.
Or you can use distilled water from your dryer.
Yeah. So distilled water, don't drink distilled water in high quantities. It's dangerous. You can die.
No, you dilute it with whiskey.
Yeah, but a few drops won't kill you.
Yeah.
It's okay.
So they say soda. Soda typically means those old soda dispensers. They have a little bit of sourness from the soda production. So these mineral carbonized waters are typically quite sour.
Has Ben just got out of bed? No, it's pretty much in the evening, but my hairstyle is called scruffy. Okay, so yeah, it quite got some punch in there.
Yeah.
I do like the cask strength whiskies because you can dilute them to how much you want and how much you feel like you want to have the intensity.
And those are typical bottles in Europe, 0.7 liters, in the US, 0.75 liters. And this one is a full liter. And if you dilute it down to 40, then you have 1.5 liters. And this is not too expensive. So it's quite good. It does not carry an age statement any longer, but it typically has an age statement of 10 years on it. So it's not far away from 10 years, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Just gotta go right over to the Highland Park.
Yeah. So the Highland Park is from the Orkneys, and it's down to 40%. So we're going down a little bit. But on the other hand, it shows a little bit of smokiness, which is quite typical for the islands out there, because it was more expensive to move out the coal to the islands. So they use typically the peat they had for drying the malt, and from that some peatiness came into the whiskey. I'm smelling on the cork because there are some bad corks out there, very, very few, a tenth of which you have with wine, so 1 out of 2,000 is my experience, may contain a bad cork. So you see, we're not emptying our glass. We're taking a new one because if we would have emptied the full glasses we had here,
so would be a bit more.
So for the beginner, the smell is much, much more important than the taste, and you can stay for an evening or half of an evening with this amount of whiskey, and in this amount of whiskey is less alcohol than in a bottle of beer.
Yeah. Someone has a question. As a newbie, does the color tell you much about the whiskey? Whiskey says, do you guys examine it like one would examine wine color? Depends on if you have coloring in the whiskey. If you have coloring in the whiskey, then who knows? It's colored. But these here, they're not colored. So you can...
The first three are not colored, and the Talisker has a little added for leveling out the different colors of the batches.
Yeah, they want to keep their product the same. So they... Yeah. And every whiskey matures differently. But you can look at the color and you say, okay, the darker it gets, the older it is. But usually you do have the bottle and you do know the age.
And not only the age, but also what has been in the cask before. So from a sherry cask, you get the color from the grapes. So there are older ones. If you have a cask which is reused, so the Americans have to use always fresh casks, and the Scots, they reuse casks for those premium whiskies 2 times, maximum 3 times, and for the discount whiskies up to 10 times. And then if you have the 9th filling in a cask, then the resulting color will be very, very light.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's smoke in it.
There is a bit of smoke in it, and we're gonna talk about peat smoke the next. But you do get a bit of a fresh note in there, and a bit of a medicinal note, a bit of a smoky note, a bit of a sea note, seaweed, maritime.
Yeah. The medicinal note depends on the peat itself and of the level of peat which is in this whiskey, or the peat smoke, which describes it better. There are really medicinal notes like phenols, with which you clean hospitals. Then there are bonfire smokes. Then there is old ashes, old cigars, and there are so many different tastes of smoke because the taste comes from phenols, which we'll talk in a few minutes about that. And those phenols are hundreds or thousands of different compounds and all taste a little different.
Yeah, so it's a bit of a marine one. There's still the joke going on with the stain on my collar, but usually when you do trolling, if you've read the Legend of the Blood Ninja, usually when you get caught, you change the story.
Yeah, there's sweetness, a lot of sherry in it, and a little bit of spiciness, well, from herbs or heather. So if you start with it, it's quite light because it has so few ABV compared to the 60% ABV of the Glenfarclas. So this is weaker, a lot weaker. But if you keep it for 10, 20, 30 seconds in your mouth, then the aroma adds up. And if it's still too light, then take a second, very small sip on top of that. The aromas will add up in your mouth. And after 2 small sips of this, the aroma will be there in total.
Yeah, it's a peaty one, but it's really, really, really light one. You do get a bit more peat when you wait a bit, but you do have, it's a very balanced one. You do have a bit of a peat smoke, a bit of a spiciness, a little bit of sweetness going on. I like it, but it's a mild one. It's the entry to a peaty whiskey.
Yeah. So and it's measured in ppm, parts per million, and this is the specification. How many parts per million of phenols you would like to have on the barley corn, and after processing the whiskey, after the mashing, fermentation, distillation, hundreds of these phenols move over into the final product. And so if you say this one has 10 to 15 ppm of smoke content, then this has been the specification at the production level of the barley. And after some years, those phenols, which are chemically still active, oxidize further on to more complex aromas, and the smokiness reduces with the ages. So this is 12 years of age, so there's a little bit of these active phenols oxidized to a lower level.
It's nice.
Yeah, 10, 15 ppm.
Yeah, they don't really say that. But most of the experts hinted, or it tastes like that. So, what is peat? We did have a full live stream, so if you tuning in again, and you did have the live stream about the peat, then I've already told you about it. This will be a bit of a recap. But if you're new, this is how they peat the whiskey. It all starts with peat. And that is a piece of peat. It's a very fibery piece of peat. Usually it's a bit rounder, less fiber in it. Peat is made from plants. We have plants and like roots and leaves and heather and other organic substances like sheep leftovers, and they sink into the bogs and into the moor, and they compost without oxygen. And that is the process of producing coal. That takes thousands and thousands of years. Peat is a bit faster than coal. Peat is kind of the product in between organic matter and coal. So you do have a lot of organic matter in there, and it's kind of a dirt, composted dirt. And
yeah, this one is from the very top. It's quite on the top. And if you look at the bottom of the picture, then you can see some darker brown clay material. Well, it composts and sits down together, compresses, and every year the mosses grow about 1 millimeter. So if you have a 3 meter of moss, then you have 3,000 years gone. And so there's a lot of rotting and oxidization, and anorganic rotting.
Composting. So what the people then do with the peat is they burn it. So they take it, they set it afire, and when you have flames, you went a bit too far, and then you just take a hose and hose it down. And what you end up with is a very, very, very thick smoke, which is very, very soft and very, very, very smoky. And this smoke contains the taste of the smoke. And what you do then is, what you use the smoke for is for the drying of the malt. So at the beginning I told you that you steep the malt and then you turn the malt and the plant grew a bit, and you want to stop that. So you have to dry it. And what usually whiskies do, like the Edradour and the Glenfarclas, they do it over hot air. Just dry hot air, and they dry their malt. And the other whiskies that want to have a peaty whiskey use this peated hot air, the smoke. And what happens is they take away the water, becomes a very, very dry malt that you can use then to make your beer and then your whiskey. And the smoke sticks to the malt and gives the whiskey the distinct flavor, that very distinct smoky, peaty flavor. Yeah, so you measure the ppm. Yeah, you can pour. You measure the ppm, the smokiness in ppm. It's parts per million. And usually the parts per million with the Highland Park, you estimate it around 10, 15. The Talisker is a bit higher, 20, 25. And it goes up to 40, which is kind of intense. And then there are some whiskies with 100 and even some with 270, 300. But it kind of tops out. So if you have a whiskey with 45 and 15, there's a huge gap between that. But between 45 and let's say 300, there's not that much of a gap. So it's a very non-linear thing.
Yeah, and those very high ppms, they tend to smell differently. Yeah, this one has, in the beginning, this peatiness. It's 45.8 ABV, so it's stronger than the Highland Park, which had 43, I think. And, well, you have a little bit more of alcohol than the peat top note on it, which is probably 20 ppm. And behind that, I find this citrus note, a real citrus note, together with different fruits. A wonderful, complex, full aroma. And how many are there?
I don't know, there's something wrong with my live dashboard. Doesn't even tell me how long in. So 170 viewers, and most of them are. No, I know. That's the problem.
Okay.
I'm an outsider. I was on the Whisky.de channel, so I'm not allowed to see it, apparently. So yeah, that's how more like it. So yeah, I do get the citrus note as well. It's a bit of a fresh one, but also a marine note in there. Bit of a seaweed note in there. A remembrance of salt. Some people might call it saltiness.
So there can't be any salt in it because the salt should be, well, through the distillation, every salt should be remain in the stills. But there are chances that with the sea air, some salt is on the casks and moving into the into the whiskey, but the saltiness is very, very light.
Mm-hmm. Mm. 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 Mm.
Now there's a sharp note in it, and it's not alcohol. This is a, well, some say it's a peppery note, others say it's a chili note. It says chili catch. So for me personally, it's more peppery, and this peppery note, well, fades away. Now there's spiciness left over, no longer these sharp notes in it, and the aftertaste is, well, quite long, and the taste of the cask and this peppery note fill your mouth. There's a big long aftertaste.
Yeah, I can't remember that. It does have a good peat note, and I always find it interesting not to have a full peaty whiskey, but a mild peaty whiskey. But the Talisker is so exceptional because it's so spicy. You do have that chili catch that is kind of attacking a bit in your mouth. It's combined with a good amount of pepper now, red pepper, black pepper, and a bit of a seaweed note.
Yeah, and there was somebody writing in the chat how different the peat smoke from different regions is. It's not only the region, it's the particular moss where you cut the peat, and it's the depth from where you cut the peat. If the peat is from quite low below the surface, quite near below the surface, then there is more herbs in it. If you more fiber. If you go further down, then it's more hefty. There's
more of a composed and more going into the direction of coal.
Yeah.
I had that discussion with a guy from the Port Ellen maltings, and it's very different if you have a top layer peat and the bottom layer peat.
Yeah.
They even do look different and they smell different. But we had someone who actually had them. Warren Devine, Talisker 10, a moderate smoke with sweet pear and apple peels with a pinch of maritime salts for kippers, seaweed. Favorite. Yeah, I do like the Talisker as well. Yeah.
So it's really good to have that one last because it's so spicy. So if you would have that first, then you won't be able to taste the fine aromas into the first ones.
Yeah. Horst Ben, can you recommend a good office whiskey?
None.
Office?
None. You will be fired. After office.
But Mac Torfstecher, I think we already had them in the German chat as well. But yeah, the thing is, I would say after hours, but I would go with the easier ones. If you invite some friends or some colleagues after work.
There are cultures where you drink whiskey with your invited
FBI.
guests.
The FBI? No, but if you after hours and you try, I would recommend beginners whiskeys because you might have someone on the opposite end who doesn't know anything about whiskey and just begins with the whiskey. So have a light one with 40%, like the Edradour. I would recommend that one, and maybe if you want to show him a bit of the peaty side, Highland Park, but don't go in with a rye and an Octomore.
What I think is important is that we here are at the beginners tasting, and you should leave away ice, cola, and just add a little water, and then you try these whiskies. And if you're emptying those bottles or one of those bottles and you still are not satisfied with the taste, then it might be that you're not a friend of whiskey. Might be. But whiskey is the only spirit in the world which shows an increase overall over the centuries. There's vodka going up, going down.
Yeah, there's always a
gin
hype.
going up and down. So there are always hypes, but only whiskey shows a steady rise in sales. So this is what combines with the tasting buds of mankind.
Yeah. The thing is, here someone says the key to a nice office whiskey is a non-round bottle to prevent them rolling away. And if you have a flat bottle, you can put it in a folder. Folder it.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we're through.
Yeah.
No, wait. That was your turn again.
Yeah.
There was one section as well here. There we
Yeah.
go. The
So,
regions.
The regions. There are several regions in Scotland where whiskey is and was produced for centuries already. And the first is the lowlands, and on the lower right of the map you can see this ochre brownish color, and then the orange one of the lowlands, and this is the border to England, the hated foe from the past. And the lowlands were the most populated area in Scotland for centuries, and the red square there is the capital of Edinburgh. And everybody was producing whiskey in the lowlands, where lots of farms were resided, and produced or delivered the whiskey into the major city where the crown resides. And then there is Glasgow, the second one, a little bit to the west, which is today the biggest city in Scotland. And those both metropolitan areas is where most of the whiskey is consumed, and in former times the lowland produced, and it was forbidden to produce in the Highlands, which are in the north of this region, because it is a very remote region and nobody was able to travel there, and there were no taxes collected over there. So we had problems, or they had problems collecting taxes, so they said, well, as they are today, we forbid that. So whiskey production was forbidden, but nobody cared. So there were thousands of small distilleries out there, and it was a King Edward?
Something like
Alexander Edward, I think.
They had Edward, and Henry was pretty popular.
Yeah.
George was also, but I think George was later.
He was a friend of the forbidden single malt whiskey from the Highlands. The lowlands most of the lowland was cheap column still grain whiskey. It was awful and really bad. And he said, well, the best one is from the Highlands. It was forbidden. Okay, he was a king. And then he said in 1823, well, we released the ban, but you have to pay taxes. Then later on, the railway moved into Scotland and then in the Highlands, and then everything went just fine.
I think that was something like late 18, not 19. You always want to say 19, 1823, something like that. So most of the distilleries registered 1924. Some of them, like Edradour, were a bit late with 1825.
Yeah. So
that's why you have the most distilleries registered 1924.
And Highland Park is 1798 because it does not reside in the Highlands.
It's
but
on the islands.
On the islands, and there were different regulations going on. So they were able to have a legal distillery earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Then there are the islands in the very north, the Orkney Islands, with a big island where Highland Park is on. And then the next to the left is Skye, the Isle of Skye. Today there's a bridge over to it at Kyle of Lochcalch, and the Talisker distillery is on the west coast of the island. And further to the south there's the Isle of Mull. There's only just one distillery on it. And further down is Jura, Isle of Jura, and then the Mull of Kintyre, Campbelltown, with the capital of Campbelltown, and then the Isle of Arran, which also has one distillery, and in a few years there will be 2 distilleries,
really?
as there will be on Skye. I think the second one on Skye is already
Yeah,
built, but they do not run it for more than 3 years, so they have no whiskey to sell.
Yeah,
in the
I've read the
world.
one with Sky, but not with the Aaron yet.
Yeah.
Okay, so, and there's one region.
Then the Isle of Islay, which is very intense, peated whiskey, very, very smoky. So this is an own region in Scotland. And, well, if you like the Talisker 10, then you should move on to the whiskies from Islay, like this Kalila, which see in the back. So if Benedict switches the main screen back.
Well,
So this one, Kalila, and there is the Lagavulin as the, well, most popular, very peated whiskey on Islay. Yeah, is something left over?
okay.
Probably a few questions.
Okay, I think we have 1 hour and 10. I think we do have a bit of time for questions. So if you are a beginner, please ask your questions. I know there are quite a few number of whiskey experts in there, and they will do more difficult questions. But have a try. If we missed anything about anything that we skipped, that what do you call it? That you might be interested in as a whiskey beginner.
Does Iceland produce good whiskey? Yeah, I visited Iceland in 2016, and I visited a whiskey distillery over there. They were quite new. They had a new, not already a whiskey, but a new make 1 year from a cask, and it was, well, pretty interesting, and they will have a good future.
Make a whiskey, but office whiskey, please. That office whiskey is here. Try to get a job in one of these law firms in the USA. There is always office whiskey.
Yeah, this is Boston Legal.
Boston Legal.
And there's a tale about Boston Legal. When they started Boston Legal in Australia, the rise of whiskey was immense, was measurable. So because they, after this, one of those takes, in the end they have whiskey on a balcony, I think, and discuss what they had seen, and yeah, so whiskey in the television is good for us.
Theo, all these quality whiskies are full of aromas: cherries, vanilla, smoke, grass. Why not get by some cheap cherries, vanilla, go and cut some grass from the garden and light up a cigar? I don't know why anybody would do this.
So, as we said in the beginning, the law prohibit that. If you mix it up with herbs and spices, then you have an infused whiskey. Then it's called a liqueur. And then, well, you find that Athelbrose, Glenfarclas, there's Arran liqueur. There's a lot of those mixed, spiced, flavored spirits on the market. Yeah.
Ben, what does your hairdresser do professionally? He's a whiskey dealer. I used to cut my hair myself, but why is Irish whiskey is triple distilled?
Not all Irish whiskey is triple distilled. There are, well, the last residual distilleries after the big recession in Ireland after the War of Independence in 1921, where they dropped out of the Commonwealth. Then only very few distilleries were left over, and all of them had triple distillation. But today, a dozen new distilleries are in production in Ireland, and they typically have only 2 stills because the whiskey shows more intensity. So in the past, it was quite difficult to keep the processes running in a good and stable manner, so distilling higher. to higher ABVs with 3 stills was always good for the final product. But today, where you have all these computers running machinery, then you can stay with double distillation and enjoy yourself with these more aromas in the whiskey.
Okay. I already asked a question. Bushmill 21 for 86 euros. Is it worth the price?
Yes.
Okay. Here's a very good question. You got recommended by a guy better down. Kutlu Cecil. Sorry if I pronounced that wrong. It sounds a bit Turkish. How can I make my wife like whiskeys? That's a really good question. But what I do like, and what I found out that most of the women like, is an Aran chocolate liqueur. You know, all the girls always go for Baileys, but Baileys is really shit. Sorry, Baileys is really bad. It's
not bad. It's a mass product.
It's a mass product. It's just you have a cheap alcohol and you have condensed milk and a bit of industrial chocolate and Baileys. But the Aran is with Aran whiskey and with good milk, good cream, good chocolate, and it's just just much better than the Baileys. And you might convince her with that way whiskey is better, and have a try it with the whiskey. But if you have any good ideas, it's always appreciated. Guys, what is your whiskey of the year?
Yeah, the whiskey of the year video will come up on our YouTube channel very soon, early next year. I've already taken the video, so it will be there. Stay tuned. It's not only one, it's just, I think it's 5. Yeah, 5 whiskeys.
Horst is a wonderful diplomat.
Yeah.
Someone says, Ian McKay, correct, Ben. Yeah, I think with the mention of the Baileys. Yeah. I do appreciate Baileys, but it's just... homemade Irish cream is great. Oh, you can make that homemade. Oh, yeah, that's nice. What is your favorite German whiskey?
Yes, I think it's Schlier's.
Schlier's? Oh.
It's the from Upper Bavaria. It's one of the dedicated whiskeys, whiskey distilleries. Most of the German distilleries have these eau de vie stills where they typically produce fruit schnapps, and this Schlier's distillery is one of the very few which have dedicated stills just for whiskey, for condensing or for bringing out the real taste of whiskey and not bringing out a fruit schnapps taste out of a whiskey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, from the Schlier's whiskey, good. The 12 years old is just the most mature of them. But they also do have the 51 is their cask strength version, or the high strength version, I think they call it. And they do have a good cream liqueur, which I always recognize as a chocolate liqueur. But they say, oh, we just put in a little chocolate, and everybody's saying chocolate. Mm-hmm. But they do have... I love your English accent in your English. Should be a German accent, though. Okay. What do you think of that? There was someone with the Hibiki. I think the Harmony as well.
The Harmony, yeah.
I had the Harmony when it was introduced in Hamburg. It was a well-rounded, but that's with all the Japanese whiskeys. They always try to make the best well-rounded whiskeys. You never have a whiskey like a Talisker in Japan, which is very spicy or going in one direction. They always have a very balanced whiskey. So if you're looking for a balanced whiskey, then go on with the Japanese whiskeys, and especially the Harmony, because they try to make harmony.
How many liters of whiskey do you drink a day, Horst? Well, this is very important. This is one of the most important things for a whiskey dealer, to reduce your alcohol intake over the whole year. So the typical average alcohol intake in Germany is 10 liters pure alcohol per year. That is the equivalent of one bottle of a typical normal beer a day.
A day.
This brings 10 liters of pure alcohol in you, and I try to stay with my whiskey tastings. If you have a look at these whiskeys, there's still something in, there's still something in, and here again, there's still something in, and the last one is here, there's still something in. It's more the smell than the taste, and I try to stay below 2.5 liters pure alcohol per year. This is a fourth of the average, and then from time to time I may have a glass of wine. So I try to stay below half of the average of the population, and then my risk for getting diseases out of alcohol is, well, quite low. So, and this is my how I'm embracing whiskey as in total. I'm not tasting here in front of the camera here in the tasting and then go home and drink again. No way to that. So tomorrow I'm sober.
Yeah, I usually do the videos, of course. I can't deny that, and just have whiskey with my friends, and just very, very irregular. If you have, like, we get offered a special cask or something, we do try, but most of it is smelling.
And you spit as well.
Yeah. So, what was your favorite Indian whiskey, please? My favorite Indian whiskey was the Paul John's.
Yes, mine as well.
Limited Peated, I think it was called. It just had a very strong flavor because it was matured in such a high and humid flavor, and combined with the peatiness was just a whole new experience for me. So, yeah. Could you please swipe Horst over the Belvedere? No. I think these guys are in some other chat. They all said the same thing in one go. Okay, I think we're at 1 hour 20. So thank you very much, guys, for watching. Please stay tuned. Please stay subscribed or subscribe to the newsletter. Do you have anything else?
No, I'm just fine.
Merry Christmas. Happy New Year. Hope you enjoy all your whiskeys back at wherever you are, and see you next time.